Hey, and welcome to our Joomla presentation, part 2. This is for the Rapid Online Presence class at RIT for spring 2016. So today I'm going to cover a bit more about Joomla. We're going to look briefly at the database, and then we're going to look into the administration section of Joomla. We're going to explore the menu, edit some content, and kind of look at the major features of the Joomla administration area. So today's lecture is going to be a bit different than last time's. I don't have any slides in the beginning. We're just going to get right into the video demo here. So let's get started. Alright, so I loaded up my Joomla website again. You can enter in your username and go to this path and see yours. One thing I didn't cover when we were installing Joomla is the database. I'm going to just show you guys a tool. It's called phpMyAdmin. It's basically a tool used to browse your database. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm not going to go too in-depth into it. I think it's something that you'll cover later on in the next course. But I just want you guys to know what it is. So I'm going to go back to my web portal here, request 3. And I'm going to go down to personal web. Over here at my settings, and you'll notice if we scroll down we have an option for, we did this one originally installing content management software. We installed WordPress, but we also have an option here for MySQL management, phpMyAdmin. So that will open up a new tab with phpMyAdmin. And we'll want to sign in using our database username and password. This is going to be our RIT username for the username, and the password we can get from our page up here. You don't want to share this password with anybody. I'm going to press go, and this will sign us into phpMyAdmin. So phpMyAdmin is a free and open source tool written in PHP intended to handle the administration of MySQL or MariaDB with the use of a web browser. So it can perform various tasks such as creating, modifying, or deleting databases, tables, fields, or rows. You can also execute SQL statements and manage users and permissions. So most of this we don't really need, and it's out of the scope of this class, but I just wanted to show you. If you go over here and click JXTADM, this is the name of our database that we used. And you'll notice I have a whole list of items in here. So these are actually tables in the database. You'll see these ones that start with WP_. So these are actually the WordPress tables. Down below here we will have ones with this other prefix. This is what we specified in the installation, and these are actually the Joomla tables. So I'm not expecting you guys to really use this, but I just wanted you to know it's there in case you want to explore it all. So for example, if I went into this users table, I would see myself now as a user. So let's move on a bit. Hopefully I didn't get too sidetracked with that phpMyAdmin. I think it's interesting to learn about it, but it's way out of the scope here. So instead we're going to go to the administrator section of Joomla. So as I mentioned, there's two sections of Joomla. There's this front end part. This is what the public sees. This is your kind of pretty web page that the public sees. You can sign in and you can do various things on the front end section of Joomla. But Joomla also has an administrative section, and this is where a lot of the, as you would guess, administration goes on. You can edit a lot of the settings. You can add or remove users. So some of the functionality in the administration is redundant. So you can edit items both in the front end of Joomla and the administrator. However, some of the functionality that you need to configure Joomla is only available in the administration section, and that's what I'm going to cover next. So to get to the administration section, I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to paste in our existing link here, and I simply want to add administrator to the end of the link. So here we're presented with the front page of the administration section. We're going to want to sign in with our username. Since we are a super administrator, we have access to this. However, other users will likely not have access to this. Once I'm signed in here, you'll see a dashboard. It's fairly self-explanatory. We have recently added articles, logged in users, popular articles. We have some options over to the left. Where I do most of my navigating is up here in this vertical navigation. So I'll take you guys through the navigation here. I'd like you guys to just spend some time on your own going through it, as a lot of it is self-explanatory, but I'll take you on a quick tour here. So the first drop down we have is System. This is where we'll do a lot of the configuration options. We have our global configuration here. This is where we can put in our site name. We can change a lot of the settings. I don't want to cover these too much right now because I want to get through the other components. So I'm going to cancel out of here. We also have the users section. As you'd imagine, this is related to the users component. So if I go in here and I do manage, I'll see myself here. As you recall, when we were in PHPMyAdmin and we went to that users table, we saw a record there. So that database record corresponds to this area here. If I were to go into a user, this is where I could change their password, change their email. If we had additional settings, such as like hometown, we could also set this here. And this is where we can also set the groups that they're in. So right now you can see I'm a super administrator. By default, if people register for your site, they're just going to be this. They're just going to be a registered user. But if I wanted to perhaps make them an author, I would go into the user component and select this. It will take you can see how it's kind of indented, so it would take this as the default or the highest level setting. Likewise, if I wanted to make them an administrator, I could do that here. Actually, we would want to make them an administrator. Likely, we don't want to make really anybody else except us the super administrator. I'm going to close out of this. Access levels and groups is where you can further modify those settings. I'm not going to get into that now. I think there's a lot of good resources for that online. There's a lot of Lynda tutorials that will walk you through that if you want to investigate that some more. So let's next move on to our menus component. Our menus component is where we can set the menu for the front end of the website. So if I go to Manage, I notice right now we only have a main menu. So this main menu corresponds to our menu up here. We can also have other menus. Perhaps we would want to have a menu for administrators or for people signed into the site. In that case, we could create a new menu section here, and then we would have to assign it to a certain module position. I'm not going to cover that right now. For now, let's just get through the basic menu system. So to actually see our menu items, we don't want to choose Manage, we want to actually choose Menu Instance. So in this case, as I said, we only have Main Menu. We also have the option to add a new menu item here, but let's just click this for now. And now we have a table of menu items. And if you look closely, this should resemble what we had on our home page here. Home, About Us, News, Contact Us. Likewise, here is Home, About Us, News, and Contact Us. Notice we also have a couple other items here. We have Edit Profile, Create an Article, and Administrator. If you recall from our lecture 1, we would see these options for editing a profile if you signed in using this little login form on the right. And the reason that was visible when you were signed in is because we set it to be registered, only visible to registered people. This is only visible to special people, meaning a super administrator or a regular administrator. Whereas these links you can see are all public. So to change these, you then have to go into each menu item itself. So let's say I want to unpublish the About Us page. I would click About Us, and from here we're now presented with the full About Us page. We can change the name of it here. So let's change it to About JP's Site. So instead of unpublishing it, I'm just going to try this first. We're going to save it. Notice when we press save, it stays open here. So there's two options. We can just save it, or we can save and close it, which will bring us back to the table with all the items. So let's go back to our home here and refresh, and you'll notice that this now is now changed to About JP's Site. You'll notice here it hasn't changed the name of the article. We'll cover this a bit more, but this is actually a menu item for a piece of content, and the content piece we're linking to happens to have a different title than what our menu title is. So we would, if we wanted this to be in sync, we would also have to edit the piece of content. However, sometimes it is nice to have a shorter menu name and then maybe have a longer title in here. So even though it's not very intuitive, it does have good uses. So let's go back into here. We also have a whole bunch of other options. This is where we specify that we want it to link to a piece of content. What I'm going to do actually is create a new content item and then we'll link to it here. So I'm not going to look into this part too much yet. This specifies if we want it to show in the same browser window or open like a pop-up window. Parent item is pretty helpful too. So you'll notice on a lot of websites they have a drop down and there's a lot of sub-items. They kind of have a parent-child relationship. So if I wanted About Us to be the child of news, or a sub-item of news, I could choose here. Since we want it to just be a root level item, I'm just going to choose menu item root, just keep it the same as it is. We can also change the ordering here, so if I were to select this, this will position it around news. I find it easier to do the ordering in the table that we saw before this page. We can also set it to publish or unpublished. In second thought, I'm not going to unpublish it because I want it to stay here. This is where we can set the access. So guest, registered, special, which is an administrator or a super administrator, and super users, which is only super users. We can add a little note. So that's good for now. Let's save it. Take a look back here and let's see if the order changed. So we'll notice when I change the order it did start appearing here. Let's go back to here. There's also a lot of options here for the link. I don't really have time to go through all these, and a lot of them are self-explanatory, and if they're not self-explanatory it's good to just do it by trial and error. So show title, link title. There's a whole bunch of properties here you can set, and if you really want to get into Joomla, I'd encourage you to spend some time looking through these. Link type. If we wanted to add a bit of custom CSS to this link, we could add in a class name here. This way when we're editing our CSS template, which we'll cover hopefully in a later lecture, you'll be able to then create a new rule for test class and assign it styles. Page display, I don't have to worry too much about. metadata. This is one we can also edit in the front end. This is the stuff that search engines use. And module assignment. I'm going to ignore this one for now, and let's save it and move on. We're now going to move on to the content section. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we can also edit these content items in the front end. So you notice when I clicked this here, we had articles and categories. So the articles, as you can see here, is a listing of all the articles we have. We have one for About Us. This is where that About Us link that we created under menus links to. We also have a little one here, creating your site, and we can create more of these as we want. Categories, if you recall from the first lecture, we only had one category in our drop-down. If I want to add a new category, I selected from that drop-down Add New, and what do we want to call it? Let's call it Collections. You can give it a description. For now, I'm going to keep it simple. So now we have a news section, we have a collections category. Likewise, if we go back to articles, and if we wanted to create a new article, we could do it by clicking here. If you recall, we could also create a new article here, so I'm not going to get too much into that in the administration section at the moment. So that kind of covers the content area. The next area is the components one, the components section. I might skip that for now and do a quick demo on creating a piece of content and linking it to the piece of content. So I've reopened our front end of the website, and we're going to add a new content item. I'm going to sign in here. And you'll see up at our navigation here we have an option to create an article. This was something that we saw in our menu editor. So I've selected create an article. And let's create a new article. We'll call it Rapid Online Presence. And let's give it some content. For now, I'm just going to put in some placeholder content. What I often use is called lorem ipsum text. If you've been a web developer, you've probably seen this before. It's basically just text that's kind of, well, I don't know what language it is. Is it Latin? But it looks like gibberish to me, but it's nice because it's spaced realistically, as opposed to me just going like this and posting in a lot of stuff that look funny. I'm kind of going to just enter this content in as a placeholder. Once again, we have our editor here, so if we wanted to change the format, we could do that. I'm going to go to Publishing. I'm going to put it in our new Collections category. Maybe I should have called it something else like Courses, but we can change that later. Status, it's set to Published. It's set to Public. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Okay, so now we're back at our home page. But you'll probably notice we just created this content, but we don't actually see it anywhere. So in Joomla, you have to basically create a link to whatever piece of content you want to show. You can create links that show categories of content, or you can just link to an individual single content item. So for the next part here, I'm going to now link to that piece of content that I just made. In order to create a link, as I mentioned, we need to go back into the administration section. So I'm going to reopen that tab here, and I'm going to go down to the menus drop down. I'm going to want to create it in the main menu for now. Here's my list of items, and I'm going to want to create a new. Okay, so I'm going to call the link Rapid Online Presence. So in this case, the link name is going to correspond with the piece of content. Menu item type. So this is where things get a little complicated. For now, we're just going to link to a piece of content. So I'm going to hit select. So we're kind of overwhelmed here with a lot of items. These items all correspond to the components that we have installed. To keep things simple, and most of the time I think you're just going to be working with articles, I'll do the drop down for articles. We have several options here, so we can link to a category blog. So this is if we wanted to link to several content items in a category. So remember, we created that category of collections. If we chose this option, we could show multiple articles in a single or multi-column layout. So you really have to read these little descriptions here to understand what each one does. Create article. This is how we could make a new link to publish a new page. List all categories. We could create a page that listed all the categories, such as collections and news. And finally, the one I want to show is single article. So we're going to want to create a menu item type that just links to a single article for this example. Okay, so I've selected that, and it pretty much filled in all the stuff we need to do. We can go through all these options again, but just for a simple example here, I want to make sure it's set to published, and I want to make sure access is set to public. I'm going to hit save. Oh, we forgot one thing. So I told it I wanted to link to a single article, but I didn't actually specify which one I wanted to link to. So here is where I have to hit select, and we have a list of all of our articles. So we have the creating your site one, we have the Rapid Online Presence one. We have these drop downs here if we wanted to filter them down further. So if I wanted to just look under my collections category, it filters it down. But since we don't really have many items at the moment, it's easy enough to just find here. So I want to click here. Okay, so now we have selected that as our article. So I think we should be set to go. Let's try saving. Okay, so we got a success message. Let's go back to the front end of our site here. I'm going to refresh it or go back to home. And as you notice, we now have a new item up here for Rapid Online Presence. So let's click this. And here's our article that we created. So we're at about 23 minutes. I don't want to go on too long. I want you guys to go in and play around with this. You're not going to do any damage because it's just a staging site. Try to go through some of the items, experiment a little bit. If you want, you can look up some tutorials online if you are interested in using this any further. One thing I think that might be helpful to explore would be the extension section of Joomla. We can explore a couple third-party extensions. I'm not necessarily going to take you through installing them, but it's something to think about. Let's say you want to build a site and you find an extension that you want to use. It might be worth using Joomla or something like this. If you're just building a simple site, or if you don't think any of these extensions will really help you out much in your goals with web development, you might just want to stick with the way you're doing things now with Wikipage or with the simple index file. I'm going to open up a new tab here and we'll go to joomla.org. Within Joomla, at this vertical navigation, we notice this extend menu, and we're going to go to the extension directory. I'm not going to explain all these tabs, but you can kind of go through and find if there's anything of interest. In Joomla, there's a couple kinds of extensions you can make. So there's an extension to start off with is pretty much anything that extends the core functionality of Joomla. So we have templates, which are an extension, so that's the look and feel of your web page, which maybe I'll cover a little later if we have time. And then there's also components. So this components tab, which we didn't get much into, these are a list of the installed components that we have. A lot of these already came with Joomla, but we can also install additional ones. The other type of extension is a module, and lots of modules are grouped with a component. So something like this is a module, or something like this is a module. So I kind of picture it as a component. It's kind of this main window here, what you're kind of doing, the main task of the page, and a module is something kind of off to the side that you can assign to multiple pages. It's a little difficult to understand all the nuances of it, and I don't want you to get too worked up in understanding it, but I do want you to kind of go through and pick out some cool ones that you might like. There's a lot of really good ones out there. There's also some pretty bad ones. Kind of like in our lecture earlier where we installed a third-party chat tool. You'll have to do something like that. You'll want to go in, you'll want to read the reviews. If you scroll down here, we have reviews. A lot of extensions will also have demos. The demos are always pretty helpful. Sometimes they don't work though. So I think I'll end the lecture here. I'll probably add a discussion in my courses, and maybe we can talk about our thoughts on Joomla and maybe identify a plugin that might be of interest for us later on. So I hope this was a good introduction to Joomla. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great tutorials on it. There's a lot of Lynda tutorials on it. You could really spend hours just looking into every little aspect of it. So I kind of wanted to just give you an overview of one of the more popular content extensions, as opposed to focusing a whole course on something like this. I just wanted to give you a quick overview since we finished most of the core content already. So on that note, I'm going to end the lecture, and I'll see you guys next week.